Now, I don't know if any of you guys celebrated this anniversary, but a couple weeks ago was the 10-year anniversary of one of the greatest feuds in modern country music history. I'm not talking about Toby Keith versus the Chicks when they wore that shirt that said FUTK and then said it was like Friends United in Truth and Kindness. It's not Eric Church versus Rascal Flatts. It's not Jason Isbell versus Dierks Bentley or Oliver Anthony or Morgan Wallen or the Unvaccinated or any of those. It's my favorite feud. It's the lowest stakes feud. And yet, it is the most representative of the drama of the last 10 years of country music. And that is Zac Brown versus Luke Bryan, all about the song, That's My Kinda Night. So in September of 2013, Zac Brown was in a radio station called JRFM in Vancouver, and he was talking about the state of country music. And mind you, at this point, Zac Brown was something of kind of like a country folk hero. The albums The Foundation and You Get What You Give and Uncaged had won Grammys, and Zac and his band were beloved for their incredible musicality and songs like, Chicken Fried, but also Highway 20 Ride and Whatever It Is. And then meanwhile, we had the rise of what people call bro country, songs like Cruise, artists like Jason Aldean and Luke Bryan. And this is what Zac Brown reflected on to this radio station. Tried to find the audio of this, and it has been scrubbed from the internet. I love Luke Bryan, and he's had some great songs, but this new song is the worst song I've ever heard. I know Luke. He's a friend. My Kinda Night is one of the worst songs I've ever heard. I see it being commercially successful in what is called country music these days, but I also know that the people deserve something better than that. Country fans and country listeners deserve to have something better than that. A song that really has something to say, something that makes you feel something. Good music makes you feel something. And then he went on to say that if he hears one more song about Daisy Dukes and tailgating in the moonlight, he's gonna throw up. Now, to say the response to this little interview on a Canadian radio station was big would be an understatement. This reverberated through the country world. You had people like me that were like, yes, someone said it out loud. This is how I feel. Thank you, Zac Brown. Meanwhile, a ton of people in the country world were pissed at Zac Brown for what he said. I remember Jason Aldean got on Instagram, and this is what he had to say. I hear some other artists are bashing my boy Luke Bryan's new song, saying it's the worst song they have ever heard. To those people running their mouths, trust me when I tell you that nobody gives a shit what you think. It's a big ol' hit, so apparently the fans love it, which is what matters. Keep doing your thing, LB. And then meanwhile, one of the writers of the song, Dallas Davidson, in an interview with Rough Stock, said this. When Luke called and told me about it, the first thing I did was sit there and soak it in. A comment like that will hurt your feelings because when you write a song, it's like one of your babies. To hear a successful artist say it was the worst song he's heard and it makes him want to throw up, that's just not cool. Zac Brown tried to clarify his statement on Twitter. He said, "My opinion is not about Luke as an artist, it's about that song. He didn't write it. I'm a fan of Luke, but definitely not that song." Now, the media ran with this for weeks because it sort of was this perfect little microcosm of the polarization that was happening among country audiences. One that I would argue kind of is coming to fruition now because the reality is songs like That's My Kinda Night with its Winner Winner Chicken Dinner, with Luke twerking up on stage, were absolutely smashing on radio and driving tons of album sales and bringing a lot of people into the genre. And yet, a lot of country fans like Zac Brown felt that it was watering down the genre with stupidity. Now, this was such a big drama that it was actually the centerpiece of the 2013 CMA Awards monologue by Brad Paisley and Carrie Underwood when they sang Why Can't We Be Friends and forced Luke and Zac to publicly squash their beef in the middle of the opening of the award show.
Luke Bryan and Zac Brown, nobody cares.
You both made great records and you're both millionaires.
Why can't we be friends?
And honestly, that's as far as the drama of this feud really went. They laughed about it, and everyone kind of moved on, except me, making a video 10 years later. But I thought it would be interesting to revisit this feud because the way things have played out in the 10 years since is completely fascinating to me. Now, I don't know if the experience of being at the center of this feud did a number on Zac Brown or made him feel like a curmudgeon, but it is funny that someone that got so much attention for waving a flag for true authentic country music has kind of gone on the journey that he went on in the last decade. The next album that the Zac Brown Band released was called Jekyll and Hyde, and it experienced a lot poppier of production. It was about these two sides of himself, and the music similarly had a split personality. Sure, you had moments like the cover of Dress Blues that felt really rooted in old school Zac Brown, but then you had songs like Beautiful Drug and Tomorrow Never Comes, which were dabbling even a little bit with EDM. Meanwhile, Zac Brown started to lose a bunch of weight, dressing a lot more John Varvatos, linked up with Nico Moon and Ben Simonetti, and formed a pop trio called Sir Roosevelt that was releasing what they called folktronica. And suffice it to say, fans of Zac Brown were pretty confused by some of these moves. And that was exacerbated on the next Zac Brown Band record a year later when they made Welcome Home, and it was kind of this return to their rootsy sound. But then 2 years after that, the Zac Brown Band released the infamous record, The Owl.
Gucci bag, stacks on stacks, diamonds fill up the champagne.
Now, I talked a lot about this record at the time because this was after Zac Brown had gotten a divorce, and there was a whole scandal where he was in Florida in a hotel room where a bunch of people were arrested for cocaine and there were strippers present. And I think I said that record almost sounded a bit like a midlife crisis. You had him talking on songs like God Given about Gucci bands and stacks on stacks.
Playing to win with the way that you walk. All stone cold woman gliding through like a boss.
You had one of my favorite tracks of all time, OMW.
When you see that OMW,
when he explains the meaning of the acronym saying,
I'm on my way, yeah. Hell yeah, I'm on my way, yeah.
And it just felt like cringy dad vibes trying to be young and cool. And I was not the only person saying that. A lot of Zac Brown Band fans were like, what the hell, man? What are you doing? At the time, Zac Brown went on CBS This Morning and tried to kind of explain how he was feeling artistically, and essentially argued that country fans don't want to let country artists evolve.
When I put out a record, I have to pick a category to put it in.
You do? You feel that you do?
You have to. You release a record on iTunes, you have to pick a category. One category. I am not just a country artist.
Yeah.
I'm not.
I love that.
Yeah. Purists, I get them. They should just listen to the songs of mine that are more country and leave me alone about all the other ones, because I don't really care what they have to say about them.
And tell all the haters to f off.
An argument that never held much water to me, because I'm like, no, they just want substance. Like, we're fine if Taylor goes and makes a pop album so long as it stays substantive, and it's hard to go from Highway 20 Ride to OMW.
I'm on my way, yeah.
It wasn't just a purist argument saying this is bad because it's poppy. It was saying this is bad because it just feels stupid. The cherry on top of this entire saga was that a couple weeks after The Owl was released, Zac Brown released a solo record called The Controversy and sort of doubled down on his desire to be a different sort of artist. And the most infamous track from that album that everyone remembers is Swayze, where Zac says,
I can't be your Tom Cruise, bitch. I'm Patrick Swayze.
Now, interestingly, when I was kind of getting ready for this video, I noticed that on Spotify, this now has a new cover. At the time, this was the cover image of The Controversy. It was just a portrait of Zac, similar to the style of The Owl. Now the cover of this is a man being ripped apart by lions, which I suppose might show how Zac feels about the response to it, or maybe to the response to The Owl, or how he was treated in the media, ripped apart. And maybe over time, that's kind of how he has felt. He has felt truly misunderstood as an artist. He's felt like no one's listening to him, or that he was maybe left to be eaten alive or something. Maybe as some of his main kind of collaborators are more likely to have a write on a Luke Combs album now rather than a Zac Brown album. I don't know. And as someone that talks about music, I've always felt the same way that Zac felt about Luke, being like, I'm not condemning Zac Brown as a person. It's about the song. It's about the music. But obviously for artists, they hold these things very personally. It's an expression of themselves, and he's probably hurt by it. The follow-up to The Owl was another kind of return to form album, which again was much more classic, rootsy, harmony-filled, musical Zac Brown. And so they've continued to kind of go back and forth in the past decade, and it's just not what you would have expected given that he was kind of a figurehead of this real country movement. Meanwhile, Luke Bryan has released 3 albums since all of this. There was Kill the Lights, which was still very bro-ish, but I would argue that his last 2 albums, What Makes You Country and then Born Here, Live Here, Die Here, are both really big steps in the direction of better country.
Of all the bars you could have walked your boots into.
If you remove some of the singles from the discussion, stuff like One Margarita, then I think you could argue that Luke Bryan has been in his countryest phase in the last 10 years. Especially on Born Here, Live Here, Die Here, stuff like the title track, stuff like For a Boat, Build Me a Daddy, those are great songs. Though for the most part, I think Luke's kind of in like a cruise control phase of his career. He's enjoying being an American Idol judge. He does a collaboration here and there, like he's got one with John Party coming out soon.
Cowboys and plowboys, just some good old
He's embracing the dad bod, even as he still embraces the twerking and sometimes falling on stage. But he's not had some crazy vacillation the way Zac Brown has. I'd say he's just kind of taken a slight step in the little bit more country direction and a little bit away from the spring break, tailgates, and tan lines vibes. And if you had asked me 10 years ago what the fallout of the controversy around Zac and Luke would be, I would have imagined that Zac would have taken more of a step towards the real country stuff and Luke would have then doubled down and gone poppier. And it's just kind of funny to reflect on all that occurred since then. But I look back at this moment and I look back at 2013 and 2014 as really important and decisive years for country music and what would become the direction of country music. The seeds of this rebellion and this kind of lo-fi indie uprising that has happened in country music now were all planted back then when you had Casey Musgraves coming out and saying, like, I don't want to be part of the good old boys club. You had Aaron Watson topping the chart the same week that Gary Overton said, if you're not on country radio, you don't exist. You had this Zac Brown versus Luke Bryan kind of public spat. That's even back when Blake Shelton pissed off people for saying, you know, country music fans are just old farts and jackasses. And you had Maddie and Tay's Girl in a Country Song that was totally part of that combo too. You could maybe argue that my video, Why Country Music Was Awful in 2013, was some evidence of this as well. Not that it's as big of a moment as any of those things, but there was this clear populist frustration that was starting to get expressed. And it takes a while for cultural change to happen. And I look at all of those things as being sort of the seeds of what became a movement with figures like, you know, Isbell, Sturgill, Childers, now onto Zac Bryan and Coulter, not to mention Casey's rise and then kind of leaving of country music. I could extrapolate this for a million years, but you could argue artists like Brandy Clark and the Civil Wars getting to like play on the Grammys and stuff was some piece of all this. It's complicated and it's reductive to ever just say it's one thing that causes a cultural change. I just think this was a clear piece of evidence that that was starting to happen. There's some completionist piece of me that wants to put a really grandiose ending on this, but I don't have a really grandiose ending to give you. I just thought this would be an interesting topic for a video. Let's shoot one, and I did. So, love y'all. I'll be back with more country content very soon. Check out my reviews if you haven't recently. Also, here's me plugging things. There's a merch link down below to a new merch store. There is a TikTok that you can follow. My TikTok's getting kind of popular. It's like way bigger than my Instagram. That's all. Love y'all. Bye. Why am I kissing? Keep doing that. Bye.